Valley Historical Committee. I would like to welcome you to our Founders Forum this evening. My name is Aaron Baker. I am the staff representative on the Historical Committee. We have a great program for you this evening. We have three veterans, one from World War II, one from Korea, and one from Vietnam. Hale Woods served in World War II. Mr. Hardway, Tony Hardway, served in Korea, and Mr. J. Tobler served in Vietnam. Mr. Tobler and Mr. Woods are local mosquitoes. And our moderator this evening is Cammy Meierhoff. She has graciously agreed to host that for us this evening. Without further ado then, we will proceed with our Founders Forum tonight.
I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to this special Founders Forum. Holy cow. We're featuring veterans from the Valley and a surprise guest there that I didn't know about until just a few minutes ago, so I will apologize for not including a little bit of your history in here. But before we get started, I've gathered a little information that I found while reading Mesquite Flats, A History of Virgin Valley by Vincent L. Levitt, who was a lifelong resident of the Valley, and I'd like to share it with you. These are the only statistics I can find on such short notice, and I know that there were a lot more that weren't included in the book. I also know that the veterans like to acknowledge their branch of service, but I thought that it would be interesting to know that despite our small population, we still went to serve when needed. Perhaps that's why we hold up such high regard for our veterans here in the Valley. The Valley was first settled by Edward Bunker Sr., who was a veteran of the Mexican-American War. The next war saw 13 men, World War I, 13 men sent off to serve, with 12 in the Army and 1 in the Marine. The population of Mesquite at that time was 215 in the 1910 census. World War II saw 128 sent off to serve, with 103 in the Army, 4 of them in the Army Air Corps, 22 in the Navy, 1 Marine, and 2 Merchant Marines. The population of Mesquite was 515 in the 1940 census. 4 men lost their lives in the Valley in World War II: Arlo Q. Levitt, Jack W. Levitt, Dalton Pulsifer, and Alfred Reed. The 1950s saw 58 men leave for the service, 43 in the Army, 11 in the Navy, 3 in the Air Force, and 1 Marine. The 1950 census had Mesquite population at 476. Many more men and women have served our country since that time, and we're thankful for all that they have done and continue to do so for our country. That was all the census data I could find. So today we are fortunate to have 3 of these fine men with us. Charles Hale Woods was drafted into the service while he was still in high school, but was allowed to finish high school before he went off to see the world. He was stationed in Europe and guarded trains transporting troops and supplies throughout Europe. Tony Hardway has been a resident of Mesquite and has served a great deal of time in the service of our country, and will be sharing some of that with us. J. Tobler was a lifelong resident of Mesquite when he was drafted into the military. He served a 2-year tour in Germany at the 2nd General Hospital. On behalf of the Virgin Valley Historical Society, I would like to thank you for participating in our Founders Forum. I got a great many more no's than I got yesterday, and thank you very much. All right, when we get started here, what I'm going to do, I think we'd like to do, instead of bouncing back and forth, maybe we could talk to Hale and then a little bit to Tony and then to Jay. Does that sound like the right thing there? Okay. Hale's been a neighbor of mine from the time I was just a little teeny girl, so I've known him a great many years. Where were you born?
Where's I from? Where am I from?
Where were you born?
I'm from out the Clover Valley.
Okay. Who are your parents?
I went to grade school out there. And I come down here and I went to high school here.
Who's your parents?
Who are your parents?
Who was your parents?
Parents, Arthur Hardy Woods, and then Joseph Fred Woods was my dad.
How long have you lived in Mesquite?
How long have you lived in Mesquite?
Well, I've lived in Mesquite most of my life after I come home from the service.
Okay. What was Mesquite like when you were here growing up?
What was Mesquite like when you were growing up?
When I was growing up in Mesquite, there wasn't very many families, and most of it was all right on the main highway. There's several garages in town. And there was a couple of service stations and things, and that's about all we had here at that time.
What'd you do for fun?
What did you do for fun? Fun. What did you do for entertainment, fun, play?
You remember fun.
Well, there just wasn't much anything, but them days we had a lot more dances around than they have now. And that's where we spent most of our time.
Okay. What was Mesquite like just before you went off to war? You were in high school.
What was Mesquite like before you went off to war?
At the high school.
I guess, what was you doing before you went off to war?
I was going to high school. Just as quick as I got out of high school, they took me.
And were you drafted?
Was you drafted?
But,
Was you drafted?
yeah.
What branch of the service did you serve in?
What branch of the service?
I was 187 MPs, railroad MPs.
That sounds interesting. Do you remember if, while you were in the service, did Mesquite do much to aid the war effort?
When you were in the service, did Mesquite do much to aid the war effort?
I don't know of anything where the Mesquite was helping out anything there, only just furnishing the boys to go there.
None of the pretty girls wrote you letters?
Sent you that. What was it again now?
None of the pretty girls sent you letters?
Any of the pretty girls send you away?
And
Pretty girls send you away?
oh yes, I did a lot of them.
Did you have any of your friends that you were in high school with that went to war with you?
Was you have any of your friends that went in the service at the same time?
Well, from here, I don't know, but from out home, I didn't have that I knew.
None in your particular branch then, huh? Was the military service your first time out of Nevada?
Was this the first time out of Nevada when you went in the military?
No, I was in Salt Lake a couple of times, and I was in LA several times while I was going to high school.
What years did you serve?
What years did you serve?
But, gosh, I don't remember.
45 to 47.
45 to 47.
Somewhere in there, yeah.
Janice said 45 to 47. Does that sound about right? What did you do in the service?
What did you do in the service?
We was stationed in Italy on, we had to train cars and things to take movers where they wanted them to go. We had to take some into Germany, we took some into France. After we got them there, then we waited a few days and we had a train. Then we'd bring the train back to Italy again.
So you got to see a great deal of Europe then.
You got to see a great deal of Europe then.
Yes, I'd seen quite a bit of that, most of it along the highways, or along the railroads and like that. We had our own men that was running the trains, and we had our own engines, our own box cars, everything like that. Theirs was all blowed up. Most of it was all electric trains, and that their plants and all was blowed up.
Did you get razzed for being from such a small town?
Did you ever get teased for being from such a small town?
Get what?
Teased about being from such a small town?
No, nobody. most of them's all in small towns anyway that I was around.
Would you care to share any of your experiences? I hear you got to tour the concentration camp.
Yeah, you want to share any experiences while you were over there about concentration camp and that stuff?
Well, I was to the concentration camp once, just for a little while. But all I can tell you on the concentration camp is what they told me. They had they'd bring them in, they'd run them in this one big room. They'd close that off tight. They would gas them all. Then, after they was gassed so long, they cleared it all out. They took the gold out of their teeth. They took what money they had. Then they went to the furnaces after that. And that's about all I can tell you about the concentration camp. While we was over there, the general of Italy, he was going into Switzerland, and he picked my buddy and I to go with him and guard his train while he was there. And while we was there, I was writing to a girl in that same town. The teacher got their names for us, and we wrote back and forth. I had a picture of her, she had a picture of me, and so I thought, well, I'll look her up. Most of them can talk English over there, and I asked around. I finally found her, and General Lee let us go to work and have a few days off just to have her show me around, and I really had a good time there with her. She still had my picture, and I had hers on me.
If you have any other interesting experiences, although that sounds very interesting.
Did you have any other interesting experiences while you were there?
Well, not exactly.
Well, it sounds like you had a very good tour guide then.
It sounds like you had a very good tour there.
Yes.
Well, you came home in 1947. Does that sound about right?
You came home in 1947, does that sound about right? 1947 is when you came home?
I don't remember.
Had Mesquite changed any when you got back home?
Did anything change very much when you came back home?
No, it was all about the same.
There were still cows and fields and tractors. And did you get a homecoming of any kind upon your return to Mesquite?
Did you come back to Mesquite or did you go out to Barkley?
No, I come into Caliandy and then on into home. I got discharged in Campbell, California.
The scenic route. Okay. What was your most vivid memory of your time in the service?
What was your most vivid memory of your time in the service? Your most vivid memory of the time you spent in service? Did you travel over there on a ship or anything, or how did you go?
Oh,
over there?
yes.
No, about your ship experience?
When we went over on the Mariposa. It was a two-stacker. We was a couple of weeks going over, darn near, and out on deck, it was all boarded off like you would a railroad car. And a bunch of us is sitting in there all the time. That's where a lot of us slept. But there's about 5,000 of us or better on that ship there then. When we landed in Naples, and it was cold. That was in Thanksgiving, November, and it was cold there then. In fact, a lot of us pulled our beds together and thrown our blankets down and our overcoats over us. We slept a lot warmer that way.
How did you come home? Did you come home on ship also?
Did you come home on the ship also?
was shipped to Cammy, California.
Well, that sounds quite memorable. Did you bring home any mementos from your service?
Did you bring home any items from being in the service, memento type stuff?
Yeah, I just brought home some pictures, but where I could find them, I don't know.
How do you feel about your time you spent in the service?
How do you feel about the time you had spent in the service?
They wanted me to stay there, but I said no.
When you came home, what did you do after the war?
When you got home, what did you do?
Well, I worked for a while, then I'd come in and out on the skate, and that's where I met my wife. And after we went together for a while, we finally got married. I worked out home on the railroad for a couple of years, and come down here. We went down to Hidden Valley, worked on the dairy farm. We worked up in the Upper Melody there for a couple of years on the dairy farm. Then I moved down to the lime plant down there just out this side of Vegas. I worked there for 39 years. Then I retired from there, which wasn't very much.
And then what did you do?
Then what did you do?
Well, I was a crossing guard here for a few years and then finally retired. I retired, my son retired, and my wife all retired the same day.
So you had 2 children, correct?
Yes, I have a daughter and a son.
Well, thank you very much, Hale. That was quite interesting. All right, Tony, your turn. Where were you born?
Hear my voice over top of that. I was born in a small coal mining town in West Virginia.
And who were your parents? Who were your parents?
My father was Ben Hardway, and my mother was Leela.
And you've lived in Mesquite for 11 years, is that correct?
11 years, June the 10th. I almost feel like I'm a citizen now.
Well, you do serve on the Honor Guard, is that what it's called?
I coordinate the activities for the Virgin Valley Veterans Honor Guard.
Well done. Okay. Were you drafted or did you volunteer?
I ran away from home. I enlisted.
What branch did you serve in?
United States Air Force. It was 1 year old when I got in it.
Brand new one. Was the military service your first time out of your small town?
No, I had gone all the way to the next door state over there in Kentucky one time. My grandfather was over there, so I went over there.
What was your hometown like during the war?
Well, during the 40s, I had 2 uncles, one in the Pacific and the Air Force, and one in run along with Mr. Patton in Europe. And of course, we went through all the rationing and the little tickets that you had to get a hold of to buy gas and food. So I remember that the kids my age was always trying to gather up something for the war effort, buy bonds and buy stamps.
Yes. What years did you serve?
I went in 1948, got off the active duty in 1974, and did 4 years reserve time to get a complete 30 years in.
Long time. What were your duties?
My first opportunity was to be a gunner on a B-29 in Anderson Air Force Base in Guam in 1949 and 50.
What were your next duties?
Moved from Guam to Okinawa in June 25th, 1950. They had what they called a Korea Peninsula that was getting overrun by the North Koreans, and we moved to Okinawa to fly bombing missions over in the Korea area.
You were a pilot or a...
No, I was a gunner on board the B-29. Unfortunately, we didn't make it back on one of our flights. We got shot down July the 12th, 1950.
And where did you land?
In the Yellow Sea. Unfortunately, the first two members of our crew, Bombardier and one of the gunners that bailed out first because the airplane was on fire, were both captured and died in prison camps over there. I was fortunate to be with a group of 7 of us, and the group up in front, 4 people, we all were rescued and brought back into Japan. Again, I'm the fortunate one. I was the only one that got wounded, and I spent some time in the hospital in Osaka, Japan. You got to realize when you're 18 years old, you can't believe you get hurt.
Well, you were from a small town then.
Yes, I did.
Get razzed by your fellow soldiers about being from the sticks?
I didn't catch the question.
Did you get teased a lot about being from such a small town?
Only from people from California, especially the ones from Los Angeles, and maybe a couple from New York. But all the rest of us guys that were from small towns didn't take it too well, so we've smoothed it out.
Did you get lots of letters from home?
Not really. I'm not much at writing, and so if I don't write, I don't expect anything back.
Okay. Well, you spent a career in the service then.
Yes, I did, ma'am.
When you retired, where did you retire to?
I'd like to back up just a little bit to 1971 and 1972.
Go right ahead.
I was in Vietnam as an advisor to the Vietnamese Air Force. In 1974, I got out of the military, active duty, and we live in, my lovely wife and I, of almost 50 years, we're living in the Denver area, Aurora, west of Denver. A lot of big town there, so you don't have a whole lot of people that you know real well.
Okay. And while you were in the service, had America changed much?
Well, it really did. I seen the ups and downs, of course. All of us at my age have seen the ups and downs of things. I will say this, especially since Colonel Wells is sitting out here, and several others might have been in the service. There is a comradeship amongst military men that just never ends. We know, I keep in contact, and I think Bill does too, with people. I have a close friend in Alamogordo, New Mexico, probably about 20 or 30 friends still up in the Denver area, and a couple that's in Florida, and one up in Pennsylvania. So I guess that's why I'm so proud of the Veterans Honor Guard.
Good service. How do you feel about your time in the service?
I have no regrets.
Okay.
Let me throw one more thing at you. In 1971, of course, being in Korea and being back from that, surviving, and I got my orders to go to Vietnam, and my father went through the roof. Why are you going back over to the Asian area to get possibly killed. And I says, I want you to understand something. The military fed me, clothed me, educated me, and pays me. And I have a country that I love, and I gotta go and do my service. It was payback time.
Well, what did you do after the war?
I was a very fortunate person. I wound up being a quality assurance engineer for Martin Marietta Corporation in the Denver area, and I stayed with them until 1987, and I retired my second time.
And then what?
Well, let's see. In 1987, we moved to western Colorado, and I got involved with several things around there, such as bowling leagues and bowling association. And we spent 10 years in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, which is about 40 miles north of Aspen. We came through Mesquite when Building 1 and Building 2 was built at the pepper mill. And we came down here during spring breaks to bring our kids down and enjoy Mesquite. I stayed at Virgin River. I remember the Rancho before it became the Eureka. A little quick story. We used to drive from Denver to Showboat Lanes in Las Vegas in February from Denver to interesting trips. And I always remember going back home, seeing a sign down here saying, last chance to gamble in Nevada. We moved down here in '97 mainly because I got tired of shoveling snow. I can say for both of us that we're really proud to be citizens of this city. I'd like to kick in a few of the other military organizations that I'm associated with. VFW, I was a quartermaster for 9 years. I'm in the American Legion as a trustee. I'm the finance officer for the Military Order of Purple Heart, Chapter 802, which takes in St. George and Mesquite. And I'm also a member of the Vietnam Vets of America. And my wife and I are both senior volunteers for the police department. And in my spare time, I bowl twice a week.
Me too. Once. Anything you'd like to add? Did you bring home any mementos from any of your services?
Just the body you see right here.
That's good enough.
I'm not a collector of that kind of things. I appreciate the people that do, because I remember World War II, the swords from Japan, and I always wanted to get my hand on a Luger, but I never could find one. My wife and I was fortunate enough to spend 3 years in Germany, and I kept looking around, but I couldn't afford the price.
You have a most special memory of your time in the service?
I think my time in Vietnam was probably the toughest because my wife was back home with 2 kids. She never knew what was going on because she'd get reports across the TV and the newspapers and everything, so it was hard because I couldn't know what was going on with her and the kids, and she couldn't know what was going on with me. I think that was my hardest time in the military.
What was your funnest?
We did an article for the newspaper here, and the 2 things I always remembered was tough was relocation and separation. And that's the toughest part of military life.
What's your fondest memory? Your fondest?
Being promoted.
What was your rank?
And
Your
I
highest
retired
rank?
out of the Air Force as a senior master sergeant.
Anything you'd like to add?
Glad to live here in Mesquite.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. J. Tobler. Jay also is another neighbor, but in my later years here. Where were you born?
I was born here in Mesquite. Or just a little bit of history. Our family, my grandfather came here to this valley in 1904 with his new wife and settled, lived in a tent for several years before they could afford to build an adobe house down where the American First Credit Union is where they lived at that time. But yeah, I was born and raised right here.
Parents?
My dad was Aaron Tobler and my mother's Myra Tobler.
And you've lived in Mesquite all your life?
What's that?
Have you lived in Mesquite all your life?
Yeah, except for when I was in the military and off to school a couple of times.
What was Mesquite like when you were growing up?
A lot of work. We did. My dad had a dairy business. In fact, this old barn that sits just behind City Hall here, I spent a lot of hours in there milking cows growing up. Hauled a lot of hay over the years while we were young. That's what we did back then.
Have any fun?
In our own way, we had fun. We always, after a hard night of hauling hay or something all night, we'd, whoever the kids were hauling hay would go jump in the irrigation canal and swim the next day and wash some of the dirt off. Stuff like that, going down to the river and playing in the river and stuff.
How many kids were in your high school graduating class?
23.
So it was a small class.
Well, it's not as small as the class below me. There was one class that I think only had Geraldine, 11. It had 22, and then I think there was one class even less than that that had about 11 or 12 below that. 13.
So you went to Vietnam, correct?
No, I was drafted into the Army, and after my basic training and stuff, went to Germany for a year and a half. I lucked out for some reason.
What year did you serve?
I was drafted in 1969 and served until 1971.
So that era then, somewhat. What was, what branch did you serve in?
The Army, yeah. Whenever you get drafted, that's what they put you in back then. And at the time, I'd been, well, when I graduated, I went to Dixie for a year and didn't really like that and decided I'd go to a technical school. I went up to Salt Lake for a year. I was going to school in electronics, and while I was there, whenever you were going to school back then, you were exempt from being drafted. They put you in a 4A class, and if you were at 1A, you were drafted essentially back then because they were needing a lot of bodies. But while I was going to school up there, I ran out of money and came back down to Mesquite and to work to make some money, and I started working at the Western Village, pumping fuel into trucks and stuff there, and I was working for $1.50 an hour, I believe then, and while I was working there, these people were coming in, these miners were coming in they had a fluoride mine out on Tule Springs area, out on Tule Flats out there, and I got to talking to them, and they said they needed some help, and they were paying $3 an hour, and I'd never heard of such a wage, and so I quit the station work and went out there and was operating a loader out there for them, loading grist mill there, and I was out there for about 3 or 4 months before the military finally, well, the school I'd been going to finally sent a letter out to the selective service that I wasn't in school anymore, and so they switched me right over to 1A, and within a month I was called to go for a physical, and it was all history after that.
I take it you passed the physical.
Oh, yeah.
So was your time in the service your first time out of the Nevada-Utah area?
Pretty much. When I was younger, my folks went on one vacation to Catalina Islands that was my first big trip out of the valley, and other than going to St. George once in a while, before then, that was about it. But I did, as far as going anywhere out of the country, the military was it. I went to Fort Ord for basic training, which is down in California along there. And then as soon as I got out of basic, I figured I was going to NOM, and they pulled 6 out of the company. That we had 200 people in the company, and they pulled 6 of us to go to typing school. I thought, man, they're making sending me to be a clerk or something. So I thought, well, I'll go to NOM after that, and I went and spent 8 weeks of nothing but schooling and typing every day, and I thought that was the most boring thing I'd ever done in my life. But and when I got out of that, then they sent me to a little more advanced school that was on medical records. I went down to San Antonio, Texas, to another school for 6 weeks to learn how to do medical records, and then from there, us 6 individuals followed each other all the way through there, those training deals, and from there, all 6 of us went to Germany. And we thought once we got out of the medical school, we were surely going to go to Vietnam, but all 6 of us went to Germany. We weren't all stationed at the same place, but I got stationed at a large general hospital over there. It was called Second General Hospital, and it was out of Landstuhl. And I spent 1.5 years there. I worked in the right next to the emergency room, and anytime anybody was admitted or had to go to was coming into the hospital, I had to do the little arm bracelets and type out some records and stuff. They had little steel plates on this machine. You'd type all their military information in, and anyway, that was the job I had there. And it was a good job. There was 2 of us that worked from 4 to 12 midnight. We worked for a captain there that says he didn't care who was working as long as one of us was there pulling that shift. So one of us would work a week while the other one was off a week, and we got to tour around the country quite a bit. So I did get to see a little bit of Germany while I was there.
What was your most memorable trip?
One I went down to Heidelberg and toured up and down the Ramstein, the Rhine River, and to see all those castles and stuff. It was really amazing to me. I happened to go there. I was on the 4th of July, and I didn't even realize, but they were celebrating. They had fireworks coming out of those castles, and it was the prettiest thing coming off that water with the castles in the background that I'd ever seen in my life. But that was an exciting trip.
Did you bring home any mementos?
What's that?
Did you bring home any mementos?
Not really. I bought a few things over there while I was there, like cameras and stuff, but nothing I sent home a cuckoo clock to my mother, and that was about it.
Were you teased about being from such a small town by your fellow soldiers?
Well, whenever somebody'd ask me where I was from, I'd tell them Mesquite, Nevada, and they'd go, why? And I'd always, to get them in closer to where I lived, I'd always have to say Las Vegas, and then they'd say, oh, okay, I know generally where you're at.
Did you get any letters from home?
Yeah, family was writing me all the time. Didn't have no girlfriends when I went in.
It must have been a little bit of a culture shock to go from Mesquite, Nevada, to in the heart of the desert to Germany. What's it like over in Germany, where you were at?
Well, where I was at in Landstuhl, there's a lot of trees. It's a lot of pine trees. It was on top of a little mountain, and below us was some of you have probably heard of Ramstein Air Force Base, where they had a big. After I left there, they had they were putting on one of their air shows, and some jets crashed down there. But anyway, I was just stationed up the hill from that Air Force Base. But when probably the most nervous time while I was in the Army is when on my way over there, they flew us into Frankfurt, and then they the 6 of us all split up from there, and they put us on different trains and told me that, well, I'd be getting off at Landstuhl to watch the signs and get off there, and there'd be somebody there to pick me up. Well, I don't know if any of you have traveled Germany very much. I get to watching the signs, and boy, there's a lot of things that look like Landstuhl to me, and I didn't know how to pronounce it. I wasn't sure where I was, so I started asking the conductor who'd come through to check our tickets and stuff where I was supposed to get off, and he didn't speak any English, so he finally just told me to sit tight, or he just motioned to me to sit tight, and he'd let me know when to get off. So I finally came to the location where I was to get off, and I got off, and it was late at night. It was like 11 o'clock at night, and I got off in this little train station, and there wasn't a soul in the train station. There was nobody around, and I wandered around there for an hour or two, didn't know who to call, or nobody was there to pick me up like they said there was going to be. Anyway, the short of the story is the duty officer had neglected to send somebody out there to get me. So I figured I was going to have to sleep the night there on a little bench there. I was pretty nervous at that time. They finally did, after a couple hours, they did realize their mistake. Well, I think now that I think about it, I think a police officer come along, and I tried to tell him my predicament, and he knew some number to call, and anyway, I got some help. But that was, for a little old boy out of Mesquite, I was pretty nervous.
What was your most vivid memory of your time in the service?
I guess just the travel, and never been on a plane very much, and we'd spend 12 hours or so on a plane to get over there. That's always been in my mind. And then I don't know, it was interesting to see a different country and different people and customs. I enjoyed that part of the service.
How do you feel about your time in the service?
It was, I had a good duty. I can't complain about what, because, everybody, like I said, everybody was going to Nam at the time, and for me to get sent to Germany was just unreal. I don't know. So yeah, I can't complain about my time in the service.
Did any of your friends go off to service at the same time you went, or that same general period of time?
There was some others that left here, and a couple from the other valley from Overton went in and took their physicals the same time I did. Monty Wilson, he was in a different company when I went through basic, but he was drafted about the same time. In fact, we went to Fort Ord on the same bus. Then there was a couple from Robinson from the other valley that was on the same bus with us too.
How long did you serve for?
I served 2 years and had a 6-year obligation, so after I got out I had 4 years of kind of standby duty.
Had Mesquite changed any when you came back from the service?
I was really only gone a couple of years. It was probably pretty close to the same as when I left.
When you arrived home, did you get a homecoming or a welcome of any sort?
Just from the family is all, nothing from the town itself. It was just good to be home.
Kind of a nice to see you at the post office, huh?
Yeah, there's what I've seen of the rest of the world. There's no place like home. Is all I can say. Is I love this little valley, and it's nice to go visit other areas and stuff, but there's no place like home.
That's a very true statement. What did you end up doing after the war?
I come back and was trying to find work. I think at Mike Burns' truck stop, I pumped fuel for a little while there, and then an opening for Nevada, of course then it was called the Highway Department, came open, and I applied for that and got a job with them and spent 30 years working for Nevada DOT, retired from there in 1999.
And then what did you do?
I've worked for several different contractors here in town running heavy equipment, and I've do a little bit of side work on my own and basically lay around. Oh, and I got about this, back up a little bit, about the time I went to work for the highway department in October of '71, and then one of the guys was going to St. George, and he had a date up there, and he invited me to trail along with him. I says, I don't want to go along with you if you're just going up there on a date. You don't need two of us. And anyway, I ended up going along with him, and we got up there to the Dixie dorms up there, and somebody hollered down the hall if anybody wanted a date, and my wife volunteered. So she corralled me, and I ended up marrying her the next year. And so.
How many children?
We've got 5 kids, 1 girl and 4 boys.
They all live here in the valley also?
The boys do. My girl lives up in Salt Lake.
Okay. Anything you want to add, or any special memories you'd like to tell us about?
No, it's just I've really don't have anything else. It's been fun.
I was wondering if anybody in the audience had any questions they'd like to ask or anything. No?
You were at the hospital,
Okay. There was a couple of things that was exciting while I was there at the hospital. One, well, I'll tell you a couple of them. One, I was kind of at the front door there. I had a little office, and then the emergency room was off around the corner, and this gal had come through the wrong door. Normally they go in through another door, and she come in, and to tell you how naive this little mesquite boy was, she come in and she says, I'm losing my water. And I could see she was pregnant. I said, well, the bathroom's right there. And she says, no, I'm about to deliver the baby. And I says, oh, well, then you need to come on around here with me. But that's how naive I was. I didn't know what she was talking about. And another time, from the Air Force Base, a captain and his wife didn't quite make it there. She had her baby in the back seat of a little Volkswagen, believe it or not, one of those little beetle bugs, and I had the privilege of cleaning the back seat out afterwards. But the only other thing that I remember that was pretty serious while I was there was there was a place down the countryway they called Baumholder, and it was a kind of a strong boot camp type. It was, I'm not sure if they were Army or Marines, but anyway, they'd been out on bivouac for several days, and when they came back into camp, one of the individuals that went berserk or something, he threw a hand grenade in the officers' mess hall, and we got the people off of that. So we were busy for a short time with the people coming in off that deal, and that was exciting during that time. But other than that, it was pretty humblah.
That sounds plenty exciting. Any other questions? Well, we'd like to thank you all. You've been wonderful guests. If you would, Aaron has a little memento here of this evening.